So how is an elephant in Africa similar to a dad in America? One of them is from a 60 Minutes episode that came out, I believe, in the late 90s, called Rogue Elephants.
You'd be surprised how much 60 Minutes from the 90s is referenced nowadays.
Is that right?
Everyday
conversation. Yeah. You talk about it in college quite a bit.
I remember, 08, 10, 92. It's a great episode on those those Amazonian gorillas.
Oh, yeah. Exactly. Rogue Elephants, where in 60 Minutes what they did is went to a South African national park and game reserve where there was a problem with some particular elephants. And so basically here's the background is they realized that there were a group of younger male elephants who were killing white rhinos, who are a protected species.
Right.
And to the point where when they first found these rhinos killed, they assumed that possibly it was poaching, but yet the tusks weren't gone, which is the reason most people might.
Right.
So they began to look into what was going on, and they realized that they'd actually been killed by these younger male elephants in this particular park. I believe it was called Pilanesberg.
Pilanesberg.
Correct.
It's pronounced Pilanes.
Pilanes. I need to get that correct.
And Berg belonging to
Pilanes. Got it. Okay, good to have you here to help me with my speech. On further review, just to boil this down, you should watch it if you get a chance to. Reference 60 Minutes, Rogue Elephants. But in effect, what had happened was there was an overpopulation of elephants in this particular national park, and they decided, whoever the powers that were at that time, is that they should kill a number or most of the male bull elephants in that park, and then transport some of the younger male elephants to other locations to try to even things out.
Right.
They didn't anticipate what ended up happening is that when these younger male elephants reached a period called must, when they're basically our equivalent to adolescence, that they began to act like young teenage males. They began to get aggressive and out of control, started killing other wildlife, and as well...
I don't know what your adolescence was like, Dad, but that never happened with me.
That's true.
This is getting awfully specific.
Yeah, it's a little maybe too specific. But basically, they lost some control for a while. Yeah. And anybody that's raised boys, which I have, raised 5 sons, have 6 kids, 5 sons, you realize when all of a sudden testosterone is entered into the body of a young male, they go a little nuts for a while.
Yeah.
And start wanting to challenge everything. Right. And also all of a sudden girls come onto the radar and they start being interested. And that's basically what was occurring here too. That these young males wanted to mate with a number of females and they wanted to destroy other species. And they started wreaking a lot of havoc, and which was unusual for elephant society.
Right.
And when they looked at it, what they realized what was happening is that they had removed all the role models for these younger male elephants, and they began to do a lot of damage. And I couldn't, as I was watching this, couldn't help but think, boy, isn't that a picture of our society?
Right.
Where you take a dad out of the picture, and all of a sudden there can be some major problems.
Can you think of any examples, even from your own experience, where you saw that happen? You saw it, you could point to, this guy is acting this way because there's no father in the home.
Yeah, there's so many. In fact, gosh, even I think we mentioned this last week. There was recently a problem with the whole problem in
Charlottesville.
In Charlottesville,
drove through the crowd.
Yeah, that drove through the crowd. He realized he grew up without a father.
Right.
Didn't have a male role model, or at least not one of an older age to give him some direction.
Right.
And if I'm being honest, one of the things that I always feel like I'm risking whenever I talk about the importance of a father is that I am always aware that there may be someone that misinterprets that, particularly my female audience, that may think that I'm saying only a male can do certain, can do many things. And what I'm saying is that I think particularly at that teenage age, There's things about a father who understands what it was like to be a young male when all of a sudden girls start looking amazing, and that's all you can think about.
Yeah.
And when you get aggressive and start thinking you can take the world by the tail and do whatever you want, push people around, and all of a sudden maybe you're getting in fights more often, you're getting more aggressive, and it has a lot to do with the testosterone that's coursing through your veins that you don't know what to do with yourself.
Yeah. I mean, I know I didn't want to go talk to Mom about the new hair growing on like anything like that.
Yeah,
so
and I'm sure there's some similarities
exactly.
with females as well.
Women.
That probably when my daughter started becoming a woman, that some of the things that were changing with her, she would have preferred to talk to my wife as well, and obviously there was things that could relate. So, in fact, I would say that actually the presence of a father, a good male role model, would actually enhance the better treatment and the potential leadership of women in the future by doing so. Because if you can teach young men how to be gentlemen, how to treat women correctly, how to show self-control when they're young, in terms of both sexuality and aggression, that if anything, that's enhancing the rights of women and not detracting at all.
Right.
And so I think that's what we're talking about. It's not only with women, but also with men, that there's something about, and they talk about that there was a particular part in this episode of 60 Minutes that I thought really stood out to me, where they talked about just the fact that there was a larger male around seemed to affect their behavior, without them even having to get physical, which they would too. I guess the elephants, on occasion, when the younger males were getting out of line, the older male bull elephants would even kind of bump them hard to kind of remind them, hey, I'm here and you can't do whatever you want. But they were saying just by their presence and by their example, these young males, literally their testosterone levels would drop, and they would pull it together just by having these older males introduced. And it was a huge picture for what I think in terms of the part a father plays as far as just being present. One of the episodes, in fact, we talked about in Dad to Dad was how important that half the work of a father is just being present. And I thought this story of the elephants there, like, that was half the job these elephants were serving too, is just being around. Brought things into alignment, and straightened out some of the problems. And so anyway, I found that really. And
just to
helpful.
Address the elephant in the room. We're going fist bump. And just to want to reaffirm that this is not saying anything against a woman being able to be strong or having not being as important as a man, but more saying that there's just a certain way that men can relate to men and women can relate to women, and it has a really
positive effect.
And it's been like that for a long time.
And obviously moms play an equally important role in a teenage son's and a teenage daughter's life, but just possibly for different reasons. My job as a male role model as opposed to hers as a female role model, and then what it means to be a good mom, and what they should be looking for in a future mate, and all those things, that mine's different. And I thought that this really touched on that really in a powerful way,
because women can teach men things, but ultimately they're looking to other men as to how they're supposed to act as they're growing up. So even if they have a mother who's really strong and they don't have any male role models to look to, they're not able to know how to act toward a strong woman if they're able to have one as a mate. So I was able to look at you growing up and the way you treated Mom as an equal and respectful, and be like, oh, that's how I act as a man. That's and then look at her and be like, oh, that's the expectations I have for pursuing a woman someday, someone who's also respectful and who's also an amazing, strong person. And so it's that interaction that's so important. It's
kind of that same message that parenting is more caught than taught. That every day that a father is treating his wife correctly, dressing, in fact, honestly, just by example, bringing his own male strength into alignment. That one of the big things men have done wrong in the past is the fact that we are physically larger and physically stronger than the female race, is using that to dominate or to even intimidate
Right.
the opposite sex. And by our example, that a secure male will never do that for a female. In fact,
Right.
he understands that his strength, his power, everything that it is to be stronger and maybe larger is used to serve those in his family and not to intimidate or
Right.
push.
Yeah.
And there's an enhancement that goes on, in fact. And I think every day that his sons see him restrain that and never use that to intimidate or boss or push, like you said, is an example by in its very self of how to be tender for a big strong guy, to be tender with his wife, to be kind, to be a servant, and then also to even submit at times, to recognize she's got knowledge, expertise, in certain areas that I don't have. And to, by example, showing my sons is that I'm going to listen to what she has. That's a great point. I think we should go along with what Mom's saying on this.
Right.
They even bring it up in 60 Minutes because they thought, because there were so many relative things to gangs and why, because it was almost like that's what happened with these elephants.
Right.
These young elephants formed a little gang and started bullying.
That was really interesting. They banded together and then they started bullying all the other...
Exactly, because they didn't have a big male elephant to follow and to model. So they were forming their own identity based on this drive of testosterone that was pouring through them. Yeah. It was a great picture. Then there was this other...
And it didn't take like a ton of like bigger male bull elephants.
No.
Yeah, it took only a few to really like set the
straighten
example.
things out.
Yeah.
They just brought in, I believe it was 3 or 4 into a large group, and all of a sudden these younger males just fell into line and understanding what they needed to do.
Right.
There was another video that's much shorter, that's about 4 minutes long, that I also thought gave a great insight into the importance of a father. And this one you would probably Google and or look up when wolves change rivers. And it's a story of up until 95, somewhere back, I believe in the 60s or 50s, wolves were either removed or eradicated by neither natural, I don't know how that happened, but wolves were eradicated from Yellowstone Park. And so in 95, they decided we need to reintroduce wolves back into the park. And so they did that. And they had no idea to what degree that was going to change the park for the better. And you should just watch the video because I could talk about it, but in effect, it affected all the other animal life.
Right.
It affected the grass and trees growing bigger, and then eventually even affected the way the rivers ran as a result of just reintroducing wolves into the population.
Right.
Great video. And
I could link in the description.
What was that?
I said we'll put the link in the description.
That sounds good. And I couldn't help but think, because the current statistics is right after post-war in the United States, 87% of all children were raised until they were 18 by both male and female parents. They had a father and a mother with them until they were 18. Today, that number is down to 68%. So that's a radical change since the 50s. And the fact that fathers have been removed has impacted all these things. Like, you can see a direct link to everything from drug addiction to education to teenage pregnancy to teenage suicide. And you just go down the line and you see problem after problem after problem that can in some way, not completely associated to fathers not being around, but at least linked.
Right.
And I thought there was this story of the wolves being reintroduced. It was like, what if we reintroduce the fathers to the home? How many of the problems that we're trying to solve by other means would be solved simply by a dad being around in the home every day? So you think about just one problem that our nation is throwing millions upon millions of dollars at is the problem of teenage delinquency and young men who are on higher numbers getting involved in crime at a young age and all of a sudden going into a delinquent state. And then we're trying to do things to encourage them to make right decisions. We're trying to remove guns from schools, which I'm not saying is a bad thing. We're trying to cut down on bullying. We're trying to cut down on teenage pregnancy. We're trying to cut down on how many of these things would be naturally cut down and not have to create a whole new platform within the government, but could be solved just by the fact that most of these kids, if they just had a father in the home that many of those problems would have been resolved all by themselves.
Mm.
So I thought that was a great picture. In fact, I made a list of a few things that I thought just day to day where dads just being around make a difference. One of the things is obviously by example. We talked about that it's more caught than taught. Daily example. There's also definitely an issue of when there's a sexual energy, because without question, all my sons, I won't go into detail, found the female sex very interesting. All of a sudden, it was literally like a light came on. Up through 12, it's like, yeah, she's a nice girl, and then all of a sudden, it was like 13. It was like, where did all these girls come from?
Yeah.
And it was like, I'm noticing my boys' heads turning when a nice girl walks by.
Right.
And I'm noticing
a nice girl.
A nice girl. An attractive girl.
She looks decent.
She
seems
nice.
like a real decent human being.
Woo! Exactly. Yeah. That was what attracted you. Exactly.
You just raised it so well that way.
And there's something about, I think, a dad then during those stages sitting down with his sons and saying, okay, here's what you do with that energy. And here's what's appropriate and here's what's not appropriate.
Right.
And here's the way we, handle that new level of attraction.
Right.
That obviously hearing from a guy might be easier than hearing from a mom.
For sure.
There's also, with all that extra energy, is explaining the importance of work. I do think, honestly, that part of the reason that there is more aggression outside the home is because there's not as much work happening at the home. Back in the 50s and earlier, the average young male was pretty busy with work at the house, just taking care of the livestock and doing the farm, and obviously we didn't have any of that. And so the more that a dad can keep their son's attention on the right things, and the same thing's true with the females, obviously, with their daughters, taking all that harnessed energy and focusing it into the right thing.
Right.
Sports and work, even as a young person,
right.
around the house, getting jobs,
right.
their schoolwork. So there's something about taking all that energy and funneling it and focusing it.
And I think that goes into a big thing that's passed on by having role models is you're in sort of a place in your life when you're an adolescent where you don't really have a drive or like a goal, and you're looking at older people and seeing they have goals and things they're heading towards. And if you're just around adolescents all the time, you're just going to be around people who don't have goals and just have all this energy. So I think that's a big kind of underestimated thing that's passed along is seeing someone who's driven towards something that uses their energy toward that and realizing, oh, I could do that. Even though I don't know what that's going to be.
Right.
My drive now is defined what that's going to be.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, yeah, no, it's a strong point. So anyway, I wanted to just take a moment to address the importance of a father as a man, specifically with different, and this is where all of a sudden I feel like I'm walking on eggshells, because it's not to in any way lessen the authority of a mom or a woman. In fact, I have to be honest, I'm a little nervous. And in today's society, and I think women should know this, in today's society, most men realize that anytime you suggest that there might be a difference, you are at risk of feeling like you're a sexist or being accused of being a sexist. And for me, that's just not what we're talking about. We're talking about trying to strengthen both women and men, the family as a whole, by guys using that strength to serve the family, by using that strength to refocus their sons. And that there is a moment in a young man's life when he needs an older man to remind him that he's still got some growing up to do, to redirect those energies. I had this one event happen one time when I was actually in Africa, where we were out late at night. We went to a fairly rough part. We were in South Africa, and I was I was leading a group of younger people, and we went into it was called the projects. It was actually government housing, so it was lower income in South Africa. And I remember this. There was actually a gang, and they called themselves the Americans. because they looked at America. Isn't that funny?
Wow.
There was a gang of young men, and their name of their gang wasn't the Sharks or the Crips or the Bloods. It was the Americans.
Yeah.
We're the Americans.
Yeah.
And to strike fear into the other gangs, right?
Was the rival gang like a really decent group of fellas called the Canadians who kind of live up the street from them?
Sorry.
Hey, we don't want any part of that. No, sir.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That was exactly
That's the gang I want to join.
Exactly, and they were all very nice and never wanted to fight. But they played hockey very well.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
South Africa's known for that.
But one thing that really struck me is we were out walking through, and we were actually connecting with. In fact, we actually got to have a couple discussions with some gangs, and asked them how they'd gotten there. And obviously, fatherlessness was a huge issue there. One thing we weren't planning for that night is there was a little 3-year-old girl, 3-year-old who all of a sudden came up and started kind of attached herself to one of the girls in our group and started following us. And then next thing you know, the girl's holding her hand, and then she's got her up in her arms, and then the girl falls asleep in one of our girls' arms. And yeah, it was and so she realizes we're going to be leaving in the next hour. We have to leave this whole area and go, and we're not in America. There's a whole different authority system and a whole different way of doing things over there that we didn't quite understand. And so we actually had a host person that was a local African, and we started saying, well, where's this child's mom? And we started asking questions. Does anybody know who this little girl is? Do they know who she goes with? And nobody knew.
Wow.
Nobody knew where she came from. Nobody knew who she was with. And the host there came over and said to us, yeah, we don't know who she goes with. We don't know who she belongs to. She could be one of many homes, and unfortunately, this is way too common in this area.
Jeez. And
so what should we do? And they said, yeah, there's no police to call on this one. This is way too common in this area. There are literally hundreds and hundreds of little girls and boys just like this. And they said, well, what do we do? He said, unfortunately, you're going to have to put her down and leave her here because we can't take her with us. That would be kidnapping, and you're not even from this country.
Jeez. And
it was one of the most difficult things. And I have to say, in fact, we left, many of us were in tears because of this little girl. So we did find one local person that we left her with to say, hey, will you look after her? And this person seemed trustworthy and said they would, and try to figure out where she went. But I can remember, and obviously you could say, well, where's the mom? Where's the dad? But what struck me is, where's the dads?
Yeah.
I mean, here I was talking to young men that called themselves the Americans. I'm thinking, where are the dads for these guys? Who raised you this way? And then there's this little girl, and I'm like, where is dad? And this video brought out that same thing. Where is dad? Where are the men in the country that need to be actively involved in making a difference? And so that's what this message was about.
Yeah,
is trying to bring attention of, I wanted to say to every young man that's watching this, every older man that's watching this, you're critical. Your presence makes a massive difference on literally a global scale. That you can measure problems in poverty, in education, in employment, in addiction, in almost every major problem you would name in the United States and abroad. And you can directly tie it, at least in part, to whether a father is around and involved in his children's lives. And part of the reason, unfortunately, is economic, is because still in most of, particularly in America, it's gotten closer. At least women are paid almost as much as men here in America. But in most of the world, it's not even close. And so when a father's not around, they don't have enough to just have basic needs provided, much less being protected from all the many things that threaten them. And then education, and then on it goes. Dads make a crucial difference in every aspect of life, and that was the point we wanted to make.
Yeah.
Encourage men to get out there, for young men to prepare themselves, if they do plan on eventually being married and having a family, to understand just how critical you are in your children's lives.
Yeah.
So the difference a dad can make in one child's life can change the world.
world.
Thanks for listening.